Let's take a look at shape number 2 of the E natural minor scale. And this scale shape we are basing around shape number 2 of the E minor pentatonic scale. They're going to be sharing the same root notes. If you are a guitarist who has any understanding of the cage system as well, this shape is based around the D minor movable shape as well, or the D power chord movable shape. In other words, a power chord that has its root note on the D string. Talking about root notes, let's just look at the root notes of this shape. We have a root note on the 2nd fret D, and we have a root note on the B string. Okay, so the shape itself, let's look at just playing between the 2 root notes. You're going to be playing on the D string, onto the G string, and then bringing your 2nd finger on the B and your little finger on the E root note. Okay, so that's a very small portion of the scale, but we've got all these other strings and all of these other frets in this position. And this is what I was talking about when we looked at our first shape, how we can play notes above the highest root note. We were able to do that on shape number 1, but we couldn't play any notes lower than the lowest root note on shape 1 because we were starting on the lowest note on the guitar. But in this shape, we can. So what you're going to be doing is when you get to the highest root note, we can continue past that high root note and include notes that are still within the E natural minor scale. In other words, we can play top E. So but we can also continue lower than that root note on the D string. We can continue down onto the A string and onto the low E string. So now what we wind up with is all of the notes within that position. So we can play notes above the highest root note and below the lowest root note. We are not restricted to just playing 7 notes between 2 points, or 8 notes if you include the octave note. This is a really powerful way of learning a scale. Okay, we're now going to practice shape number 2 of the E natural minor scale. But instead of just playing it root note to root note, I will start on the lowest root note, play all the way up to the highest root note, but then continue to those higher notes within that position. I will then descend back down, but I will continue past the lowest root note to include all of the lower notes below our root note, but within that position, and then I will play back up and resolve to the root note. Sounds a little bit more complex than it is when I describe it, so I'm just going to play it for you now with the click. Here we go. So why is this important? Well, this is important for a couple of different reasons. First of all, we have now learnt another position of the E natural minor scale, and we've not just learnt it root note to root note. We can include all of the notes within that key in that entire position, and we can base that around shape number 2 of the E minor pentatonic. Now, as well as that, when you played shape 1 of the natural minor scale, there was a root note on the 2nd fret D, and the root note for shape 2 is on the 2nd fret D. So hopefully what you should be able to start to see is how there are notes within shape 1 that join into shape number 2. In other words, the 2 scales interlink with one another. And this will continue through all of your shapes. Don't treat them as just separate entities on their own. Once you've learnt them, you should be able to see how the fingerboard opens up and connects together. Okay, so now it's your turn to practice shape number 2 of the E natural minor scale.